The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Sometimes when we're painting, we don't understand all the essential principles, and there's nobody better to teach it than Nancy Tankersley. And that's exactly what the video is today, Essential Painting Principles.
Hi, I'm Nancy Tankersley, and today I'm going to show you my method for painting still life. When I was starting out as a painter, I was mostly interested in painting portraits and figures and really had no interest in painting still lifes. I thought that was a kind of a dull subject to paint. But I quickly realized that painting a still life is like practicing scales for a pianist. A still life can teach you everything you need to know about painting. I once had an instructor who said, if you can paint a convincing apple, you can paint a portrait. And that's absolutely true. In the still life, we have the advantage of time. We have the advantage of light not shifting. We can rearrange things as we see fit. And at the same time practice the concepts that we need to know in understanding drawing and value, massing values, designing, mixing color, and observing how colors react with each other, and even studying how we can do edges. And I have learned in the last few years that painting still life is a great advantage to the plein air painter because you can apply some of the same principles that you do outdoors to the still life, and it's a wonderful practice for those cold wintry days or rainy days or whenever you feel like staying in the studio and taking a break from painting outdoors. So let me start with showing you how I like to set up my still lifes. So what I like to start with is a big shape. And in this case, the vase of flowers is going to be my big shape. Today, just for today, I'd like you to imagine that we're outside painting a landscape, and we're going to relate the objects in the still life to the objects in the landscape. So here's my largest shape. You can think of it as a tree, perhaps, with the trunk and the massive leaf shape of the tree. I'm going to look for some other objects that will provide some architectural interest. I'm going to look for lead-ins. I'm going to look for colors that will complement each other and values that will mass together so that we don't have too many separate little objects to paint. I'm looking for the big overall shape. Let's pretend that this one light that we have here in the studio is our sun, and we're going to try to ignore any other lights that may find its way into the still life. So it's just like we're outside painting on a sunny day, and we have to understand the source of our light and where our shadows are. All right, so let's see. I want to have some hard lines, so I'm going to try this box right here. Who knows, that could be a low-lying chicken coop or something like that, or a fence, or any number of things. But it's introducing an element of straight lines, which is a nice complement to all the curved lines that you'll see in the main arrangement. I want to build up some height and also look for some color. I don't really want to paint what's on the front of that box, but there, that provides me a nice shadow shape and a nice bit of light poking through there. This could be a barn door halfway open. In the back, I have, let me take it out, you can see, I have laid some foliage. It could be some distant bushes, something providing a shape in the distance. I'm going to build it up a little bit. Let's see what else. That actually is pretty nice for my big shapes. I could put something like this in here. One of the things that we look for in creating distance in a painting is overlapping shapes. So this provides a nice overlapping shape, this in front of that your brain tells you that that's behind this, and that makes the two-dimensional surface take on a three-dimensional look. But I'm not sure I want to use that. I think it might be a little bit too large. Let me try something like this. Sometimes you just have to feel your way through it, but that feels like a better shape. Even though I really like this vase, I don't think I'm going to use it for now. All right, so we have our ground plane, and we have a vertical plane back here. That could be anything. It could be red cliffs for all we know. I want to show a little bit of this same surface on the ground plane so I can show you how we differentiate between this and this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this and make it a smaller element in the composition. Okay. All right, so now I have that going on. Put this back here. Put all the bushes in the back here. And now I'm going to look for some smaller elements. I really like the lines of this tea towel, which help bring you into the composition. That's the same thing you'll look for in nature, be it a river, a road, just a path through the grass. All of these things will help bring the viewer where you want them to go in your painting. All right, so let's see. Another device for showing perspective in landscape painting is aerial perspective. And that is when you take an object, a bush in the foreground, and then the same bush in the background is going to be lighter and cooler, and that introduces the feeling of distance. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I've got some chestnuts. And so I'm just going to maybe scatter a few in the front, one in the back. And these could just be boulders or who knows. So as I paint, it's going to be important that these in the front have a richer chroma and are just a little bit more colorful than what's going on back here. Same thing with these little pearl onions. They also introduce kind of a pathway into the painting. What else do I have? Chopsticks are a fun device. Because I'm introducing an object that has a certain flavor to it, everything else doesn't have to go along with it. I'm just looking for shape and color and value, and just trying to make a painting that will fit together and as a beautiful painting in itself. I'm not telling a story, so I don't really worry about putting objects that you wouldn't normally see together in the same still life. Because what chopsticks can do is they can lead you into the painting just like a road would, and add a little element of color. Okay, so I've got chopsticks. I was thinking that this would be nice, but now that I have it, it seems a little discordant in color, so I'm going to probably leave that out. This fits a little bit better. Actually, I have this nice couple of feathers here that would do the same thing that the chopsticks would do. Just not provide as much color, and that may be okay if I want to focus my color somewhere else. I can also do something like take some small flowers that are elsewhere in the still life, put them in the foreground to provide a little touch of warmth. Be like a rooftop where you see those air turbines on the top of a barn. So I'm just trying to use my imagination and intellectualize a little bit, think about what I'm doing, trying to problem solve, really, and that's what is wonderful about still lifes. It gives you multiple opportunities to solve some problems. I bought these thinking that they would be a nice color addition. I think I'm just going to put one of those in. What I like about this is that it speaks to this color and takes your eye up there. It's a repetition of that same color. All right, I think I'm ready to go. What I'm going to do now, let's clear this off a little bit. So my richest chroma is going to be in this flower here. And so I have to be careful when I put other objects in that I don't steal from what's going on up there. These objects are like the chorus, and that's the lead singer. So that's something I'll have to keep in mind. So what I'm going to do now is decide my composition. And I use my viewfinder just like I do when I'm plein air painting, where I'm trying to decide, do I want a square, or vertical, a horizontal, a rectangle. So I do have a square canvas with me, and I like the way it fits in a square. And I also have some rectangular canvases. And I think I'm going to go with a rectangular canvas. I think that long horizontal shape, which is the front of the box, calls for some space over here. So that's why I made the choice to use a rectangular canvas with a horizontal orientation rather than a square. So I'm a great believer in the value of a limited palette. And a limited palette means using one or two versions of yellow, red, and blue plus white. And I think you can mix just about any color you need with these few colors. What I have on my canvas today is I always have a cool and warm version of yellow and reds. So I have a lemon yellow, and my warm yellow is Indian yellow. My warm red is naphthol red. My cool red is alizarin crimson permanent. And my blue is ultramarine blue. I usually wait to introduce the second blue. I may not need it, and why use it? It just complicates your color choices and your mixtures. So I'm just going to stick today with the 5 colors. I don't always use these particular colors. I will switch around if I'm painting, let's say, some roses, pink roses. Sometimes you can't mix the pink you need with these two choices, so I'll put in a cool red like a quinacridone red, or there's many choices. I hesitate to recommend one choice because you may experiment and find a different mixture for yourself. If I'm doing purples, sometimes I'll use a dioxin purple to get a more intense purple than I can with these colors. But for the most part, these colors will suffice for everything I need. And I really recommend using as few colors as possible. That way, if you've used up all one of your mixtures, you can easily get back to that mixture because you don't have that many choices. Getting to know your colors and how your colors play together is really essential for painting, and especially for outdoor painters. All right, my tools are a variety of brushes. Today I'm going to use some large flats and a few filberts. I like the long filberts. I like the stroke that you get with the long filberts. Today I've taken out a brush that's known as a dagger brush. I like this brush when I'm doing floral still lifes because you can get some wonderful shapes for the leaves and the petals on the flowers. And then I have 2 small brushes for any details and for my initial drawing. Toward the end of my painting session, I'll start using a palette knife. I find that the palette knife will lay down the paint nicely and thickly without picking up any wet paint underneath it. And so when I need those thick, clear colors, a palette knife is my preferred way of putting the paint on the canvas. So I use, in particular, this palette knife, which gives you some nice hard edges and nice points, and is very flexible. It's very important that your palette knife be flexible. And then this palette knife is one that I generally use for scraping off my palette, or maybe scraping off areas of paint that I think need to be redone. I'm using Gamsol as my thinner and a non-toxic medium for my medium. I do have a color that I consider kind of my workhorse, and that's burnt sienna. I use that for doing my drawing, doing my initial value lay-in, and the reason I chose it is because it's a mixture really of all these basic colors. You can easily mix it with red, yellow, and a little bit of ultramarine blue, but it's a convenience color. The other advantage is that if you do get some of the burnt sienna in your colors that you're laying on top, you're not introducing a color that's not being used, so you don't end up with something that's discordant. It plays nicely with the rest of the colors on my palette. So there again, I have a cool yellow, titanium white, cool yellow, warm red, cool red, and ultramarine blue. And the reasons I lay them out like this, you notice that I've altered the cool and warm. I'm really just doing it value-wise. So I'm going from light to dark. And if I am careful, I will have all my light mixtures on this part of the canvas and all my dark mixtures over here. Although I must confess, sometimes I get busy and I forget and I'll mix something light over here. And that's when you end up with mud, if you're not careful of keeping your lights and your darks separate. So this is a pretty big canvas. So I'm going to do my drawing with this filbert. You know, people think that a big brush like this is hard to use, but when you get used to using it, you can make really thin lines with it too. So pick as large a brush as you think you can use, and maybe even larger. All right, so I'm going to study my setup to try to understand the light pattern. In the studio, this light is not as directed as I would generally use in my own studio. I would prefer something that gives a little more intense light with a little stronger value contrast. But since I don't have that, I'm just going to push my values a little bit. I'm going to move this because it's casting a shadow. There. All right. All right, so I often start with what I think is the most important part of my setup. And in this case, I think this one sunflower is going to be the central focal point of my painting. So I'm just trying to map out the rest of what's going on. I don't worry about things going off the paintings. I think that actually provides some interesting shapes. But I do want to get enough. I want to keep my vase in scale. I don't want to let my vase grow too much. And so I'll measure it and I'll say, all right, this is the top of my vase, the bottom of my vase. The mass of foliage is exactly the same height. So if I make my vase this big, my mass of foliage would end there, and I don't really want to do that. I also think I need to save a little space for the objects at the bottom. So I'm going to move my vase up. I'm going to make it end there. And just roughly put that in. Okay. Rather than draw every individual thing that is in the big mass of foliage, I'm just going to regard that as one big shape. How far out from the center of the vase does the foliage go? About 1 1/3 times. So if this is how tall my vase is, my foliage goes out to about here. And all these things are part of setting up any painting. You know, we think we see things accurately, and then we start drawing and we realize that we've drawn some object too big, some object too small, and our pieces don't fit together. All right. So then my little white object will go in here, this object will go here, this one will go here, this one will go here. I'm going to see if I can get the edge of the table in. That's one. So right there. Yeah, so the edge of the table will come here. That will give a nice plane change. How long is the front of that box compared to the length of my vase? It's actually longer than the length of my vase by about that much. Well, I was pretty close. I want to make sure I get the angle correct. So I will just hold my brush along the top edge of that box without changing the angle, bring it over here, and I've got it. That's going to be the most complicated part of my composition. So I will just rough it in right now. This little guy goes over here. This comes back there. This line was correct and not my initial line. I'm basically just mapping right now. I'm just trying to get all the objects in the right shape. I have this mass of foliage over here, provides a nice dark. And this might be sometime when I want to exaggerate a little bit. The distance from here to here is very, very small, and so your eye may not pick up the perspective as, say, the stripe goes back. And so I may want to exaggerate it a bit just in the interest of making a more dynamic design. Okay, that line goes there. And then my shadow pattern will come over here. Everything will be in shadow, which will add some balance to the rest of the composition. So my light's coming from here, so I have to pay careful attention to what's happening on this side of the objects. And then this will be massed in dark. I'm going to try something because I really don't like having this light in the back there. I think that creates a focal point that I don't want because I've got the dark vase and the dark edge of this object, and then I've got this light that's shining from behind. And design-wise, I think it'll be better if I merge those so that I don't see that light in the back. Oh, still seeing it. Let me see what I can do. All right, it's changed the pattern somewhat. This is the type of thing you need to do when you're painting outdoors. You need to anticipate problems and solve them rather than putting a lot of paint on the canvas and realizing later that you've got a problem. Taking the time with a still life will allow you to recognize these problems beforehand and make adjustments so that it won't become a big issue in your painting.
Artist, did you know that our minds can play tricks on us and that our own experiences in life and in art help shape the way we think things should look? Is the sky actually blue? Is that barn really red? Is that tree really that shape? And even more importantly, what should your colors or your shapes be in order to create the illusion of reality in your painting? According to artist Nancy Tankersley, painting isn't about capturing only what you know or just what you see. It's about capturing what you know you should see. The answer lies in painting a still life. And that is exactly what renowned artist Nancy Tankersley will have you doing in the exercises found in this new instructional video. Painting a still life can make you a better painter overall, whether you're a landscape painter, a plein air painter, figure painter, or portrait painter. Sometimes you need to get outside of your normal subject matter to discover the important lessons that will make your painting stronger. Soon, you'll see the light as Nancy Tankersley helps you change the way you see and makes you reconsider the way you think about painting by showing you how to apply her essential painting principles to every painting that you do.
So it's just like we're outside painting on a sunny day, and we have to understand the source of our light and where our shadows are.
You're about to discover how painting still life is the absolute best way to practice for any type of painting subject. Painting a still life requires the same skill set and provides you with extra benefits. You can control the lighting.
Let's pretend that this one light that we have here in the studio is our sun.
The weather conditions, and avoid having to find a model just so you can practice these essentials. Nancy will show you how to think and see outside of the box and stop thinking too literally in your paintings. She demonstrates how to set up your still life scenes in a way that echoes what you see in a landscape or a figure.
Who knows, that could be a low-lying chicken coop or something like that.
This video is the first of its kind, using a still life as a learning tool to master other forms of painting. And Nancy's common sense teaching style and her ability to communicate ideas makes learning a pleasure, fun, and easily understandable. You'll be surprised to discover what you don't yet know and how a few little changes to your painting approach will change everything. As a result, people will respond to your paintings in a whole new way. Essential Painting Principles with Nancy Tankersley. Available on DVD or in digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Order your copy today and transform all your paintings.
Well, that was a brief segment from Painting Essential Principles with Nancy Tankersley. You can learn more about that video at lilyartvideo.com. And remember, there's a special discount for you just today only. It's in the comments section. Now, let's get right to our interview with Nancy. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Plein Air Magazine. Today we're with Nancy Tankersley. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you, Eric.
I'm so honored to have you in the studio with us today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm very curious. You have become this overnight success. Everybody's talking about you. Everybody's talking about your work. But you're not an overnight success. No. I know that. And so how long have you been painting?
I've been painting since I was a teenager, I think. Maybe even before then. The whole story is my brother was given a John Nagy Learn to Draw set. And he did nothing with it, so I helped myself to it, and I started going through the lessons, and I was hooked.
Was this a correspondence course?
It was a box set
Yeah.
that they were selling at the time, and it took you through shapes and perspective and shading and all the building blocks. And I was fascinated by it and quickly took to it, and then spent most of my time drawing and sketching. And then I borrowed his model car oil paints, that came in those little...
Yeah, testers.
Yeah. And I got a picture from National Geographic, and I did my first oil painting with those.
They were very shiny.
Very shiny, yeah. I did a portrait of a little girl. And so from then on, I was pretty sure I wanted to be an artist.
So you were, what, 12, 13 around that time?
Yeah, adolescent, I think. And then I studied art in college, or in high school, and I was discouraged, of course, like everybody was.
Tell me about that.
Well, the guidance counselor would say, well, you'll never make a living. You ought to go to study art education. And I said, nope, I want to be an artist. But I didn't come from a family of artists. We didn't really have any knowledge about art as a career. We didn't even have any original artwork in the house. So I ended up going to a college in Ohio based on somebody I met at work. I went to Miami University and studied art there for 2 years. I got a pretty good basic education there, but I really didn't know what I was going to do with it.
So what year would that have been when you were in college?
That was 1967 and 68.
Okay.
69. And at that time I was dating my husband, and it just seemed like a better idea to get married. So I did, and he was a naval aviator, and we moved out to California, where he was going to the postgraduate school, and that's where I wanted to finish my degree. And I couldn't find an art program out there, and I ended up getting a degree from University of California at Santa Cruz in a major called Community Studies, and which was basically social work. So I got my degree out there. We moved back across the country to Jacksonville, Florida, and I discovered that people were actually paying artists to do portraits. I had kind of thought that portraiture was dead, that photography had taken over, and nobody wanted painted portraits. And I'd always liked doing portraits. In college, I found I was fairly good at it. So I started doing portraits in Jacksonville, Florida.
And you were doing commission portraits?
Commission portraits.
So how did you discover that people were paying for portraits, and who were they? What?
I forget how it was. I went to an art show in Gainesville. It was through American Artist magazine. I saw an article on a woman named Manry Kenyon who did portraits, and it turned out she was from Jacksonville, Florida. And I went to a show, and I saw her beautiful portraits, and I thought, wow, I can do this. So I started doing some portraits in pastel. I also had a friend that I'd met through a babysitting co-op that saw my work that I was just fooling around with, and she had been a copywriter for an ad agency. She said, I've worked with a lot of artists, and she says, you can do this. She says, you've got the talent. So she was very encouraging. She suggested I just take some time every day and go into my studio, which was a 4th bedroom at that time. And she says, if you don't feel like painting, you just sit and read an art magazine, or you clean up your desk, or you do something, but you just develop the habit of painting. And she was a writer, so she had a writer with children, so she had done the same thing.
Right.
So
it's really the same discipline, isn't it?
It is, totally.
You just have to force yourself to do it.
Exactly. And sometimes the muse doesn't strike, and sometimes when you least expect it, it does.
Right.
So anyhow, I became a portrait painter, and I had 3 children and a husband who was gone half the time because he was flying off carriers, but it all came together very well. And I was finding myself booked, 6 months to a year in advance, and could have gone on happily doing that for a long time, except my husband got transferred to Washington, D.C., so we moved up there, and I thought I would just pick right up where I was. And I found I was a very little minnow in a great big ocean in Washington, D.C. And, it took me a while to get my first portrait clients. I was also starting to realize that there was a lot I didn't know. that I could copy a photograph pretty well because I had the drawing skills, but I didn't know anything about really color, you know, cool temperature, warm temperature, edges, designing. All of that was something I just hadn't received in my education. So I started taking some classes and some workshops at the Torpedo Factory, which is in Alexandria, Virginia. And started picking up some things, but it wasn't until I got my first studio outside the home where I started really self-educating.
Why did that change? What was it about having the studio out of the home that helped you grow?
I think it was the isolation, and by then all three of my children were in school, and I had the time, and I felt, well, I've got a studio outside the home, I must be a professional artist, I better get serious about this. So the first thing I did was, and I was selling art by then, but I'd paint a lot of paintings, and a lot of them would be lousy. And then every now and then I'd do one that would be so good, you know, I would amaze myself. And I'd think, well, the next one's going to be just like this. And then the next one would be just as bad as all the other ones. Because, you know, sometimes I think the muse truly does take over, and it's like magic, and all of your decisions are correct, and it all flows, and you produce something really well. But most of the time it's a struggle. So I realized I needed to understand more about what I was doing. So the first thing I did was I spent a year teaching myself color by painting still life in like one color. I'd paint an all white still life, I'd paint an all black still life, all yellow, so that I could see the nuances in color. And I started to learn to understand, you know, the difference between a warm yellow, a cool yellow, and how to get there. So that was a really valuable year, and some of the still lifes I did during that year got me into my first gallery. And at the same time, I was still doing portraits. I'd seen some paintings of people on the beach, and my gallery owner suggested I give that a try. So I took my daughter and her girlfriend and another child out to the beach and shot a bunch of photos, and then I was off doing all these figures from photos. And that was pretty successful too. It got me in a gallery in Carmel, and actually a gallery in Houston, and I did that for a number of years, doing all these figures on the beach. I'm a little ADD. I get a little tired of doing the same thing over and over again. So
Right.
I think when you burn out on a subject, it starts to show. So I had another gallery owner at that time who said, well, why don't you do people in restaurants? Okay, I'll do people in restaurants. We were actually in New York. She and I had gone there for some reason, and so I started shooting pictures of people in a restaurant. And this is when digital cameras first became popular. And I had my first digital camera, and I just picked up the camera, shot a few people across the room. Then when I went home and started looking at those photographs and zooming in, I started to realize the potential that there was in digital photographies for the artists. Because before, when I'd been doing painting from photographs, I had to get a really good photo in order to make a really good painting.
Right.
And I essentially was copying the photo, which is really not a good thing for an artist to do. But digital photography allowed me to paint a lot, to shoot a lot of pictures, to learn how to manipulate them to my best advantage as a painter. And so that was another step in my education.
I want to stop you there for just a second and go back to that statement that you said that copying photographs isn't necessarily for artists. There's probably somebody who's watching this right now who needs to understand that. Could you articulate that a little bit?
Yes. I think anybody can be taught to copy a photograph, and then you have to ask yourself, is that art? I think the true artist has to take from the photograph what is necessary information to make a wonderful painting, but leave all the rest of it. It's just like plein air painting. When you go out, you have to edit a scene. You have to learn to edit the photograph and make the painting truly your own. I think there's, in an age where paintings can be created by the computer, I think it's more important than ever for the artists to insert themselves between the technology and the painting. And that's why I truly believe the photographs are a wonderful aid, but they're also very dangerous for artists that don't know how to use them.
One of the compliments that will happen when you're outdoors painting or I'm outdoors painting is someone will inevitably walk up and say, "Oh, it looks just like a photograph."
I know, and you go, "Oh." I'm not being very creative then am I?
Well, they think they're doing you a favor by saying that, but.
Well, see, that's the problem with photography. Everybody holds painting up to the standard of photography, and I think that's why modern art happened. It was a rejection of seeing as the camera sees, and of course, it went way, beyond where it needed to go. But I think artists need to learn to see naturally and how the eye really sees.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's talk about the development of artists, and I want to continue your story, but because we're on this thought process, it crossed my mind that when I was first painting, just being able to paint like the photograph was a good thing, I thought, because it was, it felt like I could measure it against something. But what do you tell your students? What is the process of learning like for them?
Well, I tell them that, you mean in regards to photography?
Well, in regards to, making, where do they start? How do they graduate from here to here and so on?
Well, I think drawing, accurate drawing is essential. But that said, I think drawing is a activity that gets you to a place where you can accurately put marks on the canvas. I discourage my students from drawing complete drawings on the canvas because if they find, as they're into the painting, they've made some errors in the drawing, they're going to be less likely to correct those errors. So drawing is an activity that you gain the skill, the hand-eye coordination you need as a painter. But that said, I do really emphasize correct drawing. Then from there, it's all about design and values, and seeing values correctly and designing a painting so that people will immediately want to look at it. Artists get bogged down in details thinking that that's going to sell the painting or make people look at it, and it doesn't happen. It has to be a really wonderful design to pull them in, and then you can treat them with detail. You like a magician, you lead them through the painting where you place your detail. Then the last to me, least important is color. And I know there's a lot of people out there who think that's a terrible thing to say, but I think if a painting is done in correct values, color is not nearly as important. And that's why I have my students work from black and white photos so that they can put their own color either through their creativity or their memory or whatever they want to do. And that's kind of the fun of painting, is you start to own the reality of that you see.
I like that. This is exactly the process that I go through in my teaching as well, is I think that color complicates everything. And I've seen too many people give up painting because they get frustrated fast and their self-confidence is low, they don't feel like they have talent, and so they give it up. So I try to start them with, first off, and this is probably opposite of what you suggest, but I basically start them, if they have no drawing experience, I start them by tracing a photograph and just big shapes, and then placing the values in there. And that's just kind of their very beginning stage, and then hope to get them to the point where they can do this on their own without a photograph in the future. But I think this values thing has been really underplayed,
Oh,
And, you know, because color is so complicated, it doesn't have to be. But in the beginning, you know, you get the colors wrong because the values aren't right in the colors.
Yeah, you know, the old saying, color gets all the credit, value does all the work.
Right.
And I totally believe in that.
Right. And design does the other part of the work.
Yeah, design is crucial. And then the last thing I think is edges. After my students are comfortable with the other, which is drawing, design, value, mixing color, then I start to really concentrate on edges, because I think edges are what separates a pretty good painter from a really great painter. And
so can you articulate that for somebody who might not really
edges,
understand?
it means you have two types of edges. You have hard edges where things you are delineated very crisply, and then you have very soft edges where like one shape seems to flow into another shape. And it's learning how to create those edges. And there are different ways to create the edges. And then where to place them in the painting, because how you place those edges has a lot to do with how people look at the painting. They normally go first to the area of hardest edges.
Right. So it's usually the eye goes to the sharpest edge, and usually the most contrast. Isn't that
exactly
pretty correct?
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to, for instance, if you were doing a portrait, which you know, part of the head is further away than the part you're seeing, so that edge would go softer, I assume?
Yes, absolutely.
Unless you're trying to draw the eye to that other ear or something, I suppose.
Yeah, actually, when I teach portraits, I try to get my people to envision the box, you know, envision that head as a box where you have the top of the box, the sides of the box, the front of the box, and, you know, where the box turns, you know, is where you have the highlights. And, you know, it's funny, in the last 10 years, everything I'd learned, and I've learned a lot from different teachers because I've taken a lot of workshops, and it's all come together. And what I think I've really learned as a teacher is that once you learn the main concepts in a big, simple way, then it all makes sense, and you can start then breaking those concepts down into more and more sophisticated truths. Like you don't tell a first-time painter, cool that red. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a more sophisticated instruction.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a funnel, right?
Yeah.
So when you're entering the funnel, at the top of the funnel, you give them very, very basic, relatively unsophisticated data.
Yeah.
And then as they get a little bit more experience, you kind of narrow it down, and you narrow it down and further down to the point where then you get into the crisp details.
And the nuances.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like when I started with portraiture, and, you know, I was told to paint what you see, you know, paint what you see up there. And so I would try to paint it, and I'd try to get the head to go back. And I didn't have the understanding of the basic shape that, you know, I'm looking at this plane here, and I'm looking at two planes there, plane there. If somebody had told me that 30 years ago, I think it would have saved me a lot of trouble in some of my commission.
Well, you probably
portraits.
weren't ready for it then.
I think maybe I was. I don't think I had a teacher that told me to think so basically. There's something about instructors all have their specialty, and they like to give their specialty. Like, if you use that color, that's going to make your sky so much more beautiful, or that color is going to do this. And, you know, they'll give you a list of specific paint you have to buy. And I don't believe that.
It's kind of like golf clubs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This golf club is going to make you a better golfer.
Yeah. There's nothing that's going to make you a better painter except a good grasp of the concepts that help you turn a two-dimensional surface into a three-dimensional appearing surface. So again, I start with the very simple concepts. I try to get them to understand them. And then the longer I work with people, then the more we get into nuances.
Mm-hmm. So you said something earlier that I wanted to just bring up for the viewer, and that is that you take workshops.
I do.
And the one thing that I think we assume is that when someone gets to the stature of someone like yourself, where you're a highly accomplished painter, we assume that you have all the answers. And yet what I've found is that the best of the best, the cream of the crop, they're always taking other people's workshops. They're always looking to learn something new.
Yeah, I think there's always something to learn from somebody else. I'm fortunate that I have a studio in Easton, Maryland, where it's large enough where I, from time to time, invite other people in to give workshops in my studio. So I'm at the point now where I'm very careful who I invite. It has to be somebody whose work I really admire, and so that's been another part of my education. I think that's why in the last 10 years I've been privileged to see many fine artists give demos, and I can't think of one where I didn't pick up some bit of information that was useful.
So you started at some point, you started plein air painting.
Yeah.
When did that all come about?
That started around 2000. I had been painting very happily in my studio, either from still lifes, occasionally from figures, and then landscapes from photos. You know, I saw no reason to go out and inconvenience myself. But I had a very good friend who was a member of the Washington Society of Landscape Painters, and she wanted me to join that group, and she says, we meet once a month, and we all go painting together. So she started dragging me out into to nature, which I love, but, you know, I just didn't think the two mixed. And I started getting hooked. The first few times I went out, it was like I was so totally humbled. It was like, it's all green, you know. How do you separate any, you know, it was just totally frustrating.
For a first-time plein air painter, even somebody who's been in the studio their whole life, it's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming because in the studio you have control. You have control over the light. You have control over the placement of objects. You're comfortable. You know, it's not raining on you. The wind's not blowing. So you know, it was a real challenge. And I have to say, my work took a real step back. If you looked at my landscape paintings from photographs, they were pretty good. I was selling them. My plein air work was really bad, really bad. And even now, sometimes it's really bad.
Right.
But I began to realize that I was missing a lot by painting from photographs and only painting from the studio.
So tell me more about that, because this is a really important point that a lot of people don't get about plein air painting.
Right. Well, I think the real light bulb started going on when I studied with Ken Oster. I flew out to Tucson just because I had two friends who talked me into it. I didn't even know who he was. I wasn't that interested in doing it, but it sounded like fun. So we flew out to Tucson, and Ken taught this workshop. And he was a really gifted teacher.
He was.
And he started talking about how you have to redesign a scene. And I was thinking, oh, you don't have to paint what's right in front of you? You know, you can move a telephone pole to tilt this way, or move it a little bit, or group the bushes together, or make the road have a little better turn. All of these, you know, he's talking about all these things that you take control. You still want to honor the landscape. You want to do a painting that is very evocative of where you were and the weather that day and the time of day, but you don't have to, you're not a photograph. You know, or a camera. You don't have to be like a camera. So, so then it became fun. You know, when I learned to quickly establish the light, and then make aesthetic decisions on what would be in my painting. You know, I didn't have to put everything in the painting, and I could move things a little bit and to make them work better in design, and it became a real creative exercise. The other thing I think I've received from plein air painting, so I've been plein air painting now for 17 years, you get this, all this data of images that go into your head that, you know, when you're working on a problem painting, you know, sometimes you can actually remember things from plein air painting, or you can pull your sketches out and say, ah, yeah, that's how I did that, or that's what would work here. And I think you just become an all-around better painter. Even if you're not a purist And, you know, plein air painting is not your end all or what you're marketing yourself to be. Plein air painting is just a necessary part of being a good painter.
It takes a good studio painter and makes them a better painter.
Absolutely.
And I can't tell you how many dozens, if not hundreds of times I've heard studio painters tell me that they resisted going outside for much of their career. They got frustrated in the beginning because it was difficult, and then they started seeing color, light, shape, form differently.
Right.
And then when you get out and you do it enough, then when you're painting from photographs, now those photographs reflect that essence from the outdoors. Did you find that to be true in your case?
Absolutely, absolutely. In my own plein air painting, at first, you know, it was the struggle, trying to mix the colors accurately, trying to work fast enough that the shadows weren't changing totally, trying to make an interesting painting on a gray day. All of these were, you know, huge challenges. But now I've gotten to the point where I've done enough of it. I quickly know the problems I'm going to face. That's the other thing Ken was really good at. He said, you need to analyze the scene before you start to paint. He said, take a few minutes and think, what are the problems going to be? How can I solve that problem? Mentally paint it in your head. And then you paint very, very quickly. And then you take a little break and you come back. And if you like what's there, then you finish the painting. So it's a matter, he calls, you know, I'm really quoting him a lot and I hope that's all right.
Of course.
He called painting a passion sandwich, and I love that analogy because, you know, the bread is the analytical part of the painting, and then you paint passionately, that's all the filling, and then you analyze again. And you may have a triple decker where you're going back from analyzing to painting passionately to analyzing, painting passionately. But that is the way painting really is. It's a constant left brain, right brain shift, back and forth all the time. So once I got that concept, I learned to slow down in the beginning, analyze how I was going to approach it, then paint quickly, and then step back and analyze again.
And I think that some people believe that have to have a perfectly finished painting when they're outdoors. What do you believe?
Well, in a competition, yes. But no, just for a plein air painting for myself, no, it doesn't have to be finished. I have learned some tricks, I've reached the point where I'm not satisfied with just painting what's in front of me. I want my painting to have interesting texture. And so I've been exploring ways to do that in a plein air painting. And one of the things I do when I'm outside and painting a fairly large painting is I will paint most of it. Well, I'll make all of my color decisions, my shape decisions, my design and drawing in acrylic. And I'll do that very thinly. So I'll have a thin base of a fairly completed painting. And then I'll go in with my oil, with palette knives and different tools. And I do a lot of layering, which I didn't think was possible, 10 years ago. I thought plein air painting had to be pretty straightforward, but now I've reached the point where I can do that, and it makes it even more fun.
I thought you were going to say you picked up a handful of dirt and stuck it on
that
there.
happens naturally.
Once in a while when the panel blows
that
over.
That happens, yeah.
Well, I think the point of all of this is that the frustration of learning in the beginning when you go outdoors has a big payoff.
Absolutely.
And the big payoff is that you will see painting from a completely different perspective. We try to encourage a lot of studio painters to get outside. It's amazing how many thousands there are have never gone outside and painted yet.
Yeah.
So there's this movement now of painters. You kind of came on board about the time that movement was just starting to really catch on and take hold. So we started Plein Air Magazine 2 years after you started plein air painting, so you were ahead of us.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that all happened. I don't know if you know that I was one of the founders of Plein Air Easton.
Yes, I do know that, and I was going to ask you about that.
Well, the way it happened, the same friend that had gotten me to go to Tucson to study with Ken Oster, she was actually in the Carmel Plein Air event that year. It was 2004. And she invited me to go out with her, so I went out with her and was just as an observer. And I just loved it. All these wonderful artists out there painting, and the quick draw was especially exciting. I remember watching an artist named Tim Horn and Joe Wang do portraits of each other out in the open, and I thought, wow, there's just nothing more exciting or fun than this. And the interesting thing was, at the exact same time, my husband and I were buying a gallery in a little town called Easton, Maryland. And that came about because I had been an artist in this gallery. I was living near southern Maryland, on the other side of the Chesapeake Bay. I don't know if you're familiar with the geography there, but it was a couple hours away. And I would go to Easton and drop off my work and then leave and go home. But different things conspired to eventually have us own this gallery, and we moved to Easton. And Easton's a charming little town on the eastern shore, which is mostly agricultural, but it's a very sophisticated little town because it's a retirement area for people from Washington and Baltimore, Philly. And so anyhow, we bought this gallery, and all this talk about plein air painting was, going on with this buzz. And then I heard that some guy was going to start a magazine about plein air painting. That was really awesome. And then I also heard that the town of Easton was looking for another arts event. It had kind of billed itself as a little arts town. It had a major wildlife arts festival that had been going on there for close to 40 years at that time.
Really?
But the festival was, like all things do, it was starting to wane a bit, and the town felt they needed another art festival. So I said, boy, have I got an idea for you. So I went to the economic development officer of the town, Al Bond, and I pitched the idea to him. And I was also kind of gently nudged by Ross Merrill, Ross was a big proponent of plein air painting. I knew him from Washington Society of Landscape Painters. And Ross Merrill also had worked for the National Gallery for many years. So he had a real overview of art movements and art history, and he kept saying, Nancy, you got to do this, you got to do this. So he helped me make up a document that would convince the town fathers that this was the thing they needed to do. So anyhow, they loved the idea. We pulled together a consortium of business owners, individual artists, the Academy Art Museum, which is an accredited art museum in Easton, Maryland, and Easton Main Street organization. And we did that in January of 2005, and we had our first plein air event in July of 2005.
So that event has kind of become the premier event in the plein air world.
Yeah, definitely. I think it has.
What do you think is the reason that event has kind of become the standard? What is it that they do differently and they did it out of the box? Mm-hmm. Or you did it out of the box?
Well, I think there were other events starting at the same time, like Plein Air Annapolis, and I forget who else was the same year. But the big thing with Easton was it had no competition. In the middle of the summer, there was nothing going on in that little village. We had all these businesses and restaurants, and nobody was coming in. They were all getting in their cars and driving straight to the Atlantic Ocean and bypassing Easton. So, and the fact that nothing was going on made everybody embrace it. The town got all excited about it. There were people. It's a very sophisticated town, and full of people that came from other careers, knew how to do things, knew how to publicize, knew how to sell tickets. But I think the other thing that was really important from the get-go, our very first donor, his name was Tim Dills, and he's since passed on, but he was a businessman who loved art, and he said, I'll give you $10,000, but I want it all to go to the artists. And which meant we had to raise the rest of the money, but that $10,000 all went to the artists in the form of prize money. And I think because we started off with really good prize money, we got good artists, and we had good people managing it, and wonderful volunteers, a community that totally embraced the idea, even though they didn't even know what it was about. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget, one of my best friends was a volunteer coordinator, and like 5 days before the event was to start, she said, "I just can't get any volunteers." She said, "I have only a handful. Everybody's busy." And then the artists started coming to town, and we had this really good-looking artist from Chicago, and it was hot in Easton in July, and he's out painting on the bypass, and he took his shirt off. And all of a sudden, she started getting all these calls. "Elizabeth, I think I'd like to volunteer."
So sex sells.
I guess.
Even in plein air painting.
So anyhow, it just, the first year it was successful. We made $50,000 in sales, and every year it has gone up, exponentially. And so I really think maybe at this point, because there's lots of organizations that have kind of copied us, and they're doing a good job. San Angelo on Plein Air, Texas has really taken off because they have really studied Easton. But I think the one advantage Easton has that most of them don't have is that, again, it doesn't have any competition during that time of the year. All eyes are on that event.
So what do you think about this entire plein air movement? Because there are mixed feelings that we hear. The feelings we hear are, some artists will say, well, there's too many events, or there's not enough artists to do high quality events. Yeah. Others will say, we're putting uncooked artists into the market. Mm-hmm. And there are now, probably since we started the magazine, when we started the magazine, there probably were less than a handful of events. And today there are 150, 200 of them, and every year we learn of another 20 or 30 that are starting,
right?
Because communities and charities are finding it a great way to raise money.
Right.
So what's the upside, what's the downside?
Well, it's funny you ask, because I've certainly have gone through many phases of how I feel about the movement. Having, at that time, being a gallery owner, at first it was very good for our gallery, and then I began to realize that it was not good for the gallery, because as the event became more popular, people stopped buying in the gallery. And I worried about that a lot. I felt bad about the galleries in our town that had supported the event, who now were feeling the negative effect of all the money being spent there. The recession happened at the same time, too.
Right,
in our third year, the recession happened, and people weren't buying all year long. They were saving their money to buy at one time, and it was much more fun to buy from plein air event than just a regular gallery. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of things conspired. The internet also was a big thing. So I had to go through this kind of resentment, like, oh, what have we done? We've opened this Pandora's box, and step back and really take a long view, because I truly do believe this is an art movement that will be written about by historians 100 years from now.
Yeah, this is the largest art movement in the history of art.
Yeah, and it's brought artists to art. I mean, it's brought many people that wanted to paint into the act of painting, so it's created a whole new industry of workshops, which is good for professional artists. But even more than that, it has made collectors of people who would never dream of going into a gallery and buying an original piece of art.
Because,
I saw that.
Why?
Well, galleries always, for some people they were elitist or
intimidating,
and you have to be really rich to buy paintings from a gallery, and so a lot of people just didn't. They just bought prints or photographs, which nothing wrong with photographs. I think there's definitely an art to photography and photograph prints, but oil paintings and original one-of-a-kind paintings were just kind of out of the reach of a lot of people. Hence my own parents, would never dream of buying an original piece of art. But seeing the artists out on the street, stopping and chatting with them, getting the invitation to come to see them at the quick draw or come to the show, which is, there's no fee to get into the show, started bringing people in, and they fell in love. Oh, I saw that artist paint that, and then they, the price point was relatively low. At some of the events, it's very low, and then, at the better events, the price point is, is certainly moving up the entry level, but it's still affordable for the vast majority of Americans. And I can remember this one woman who worked for the city of Easton, who she bought her first oil painting, and just the happiness, the pride she had in purchasing that from an artist. And every time I run into her, she still talks about that. And it wasn't the only one she bought every year. She was not buying the many $1,000 paintings, but she was buying the $300 or $400 paintings. And so I think introducing, people to the possibility of owning an original piece of artwork is a huge benefit of the plein air movement.
And there's nothing like going into a house filled with original art.
Oh, yeah.
It's, I've gone into the homes of billionaires who have Thomas Kincaid prints on the wall.
Right.
And then you walk into somebody's house, maybe somebody doesn't have a lot of money, but they've filled it with a lot of even $200, $300, $400 paintings. Right. And there's just something that enriches, is that a word? Enriches that
yeah.
life, it enriches that household, and it makes it feel a little bit more special.
It does. It really does.
So do you still have the gallery?
No, we sold the gallery last year to a wonderful guy who's an art lover and a fledgling artist and an architect.
So you're active in the plein air movement.
Yes.
You're painting landscapes. Are you doing any more portrait work?
I do.
Okay.
Although now I only do portraits from life. I've learned, I don't do a lot of portraits. I made a decision maybe 15 years ago that that was not what I wanted to do. I had a portrait get into the Naval Academy museum collection, and I was strangely not all that excited about it. and that's kind of about the time I started going out and painting plein air. And I enjoyed being a gallery artist, and I just enjoy the flexibility of being able to paint what I want to paint.
Do you use photographs at all anymore?
Oh yeah, I use them all the time in the studio. I also try to paint from life in the studio. But photographs are now just a small part of my toolbox.
Right. Not the major part.
Not the major part,
Yeah.
Not at all. And that's one thing I enjoy doing, is teaching people how to use photographs the correct way and putting them where they belong, becoming the boss, not letting the photograph be the boss.
That's hard to do.
It is hard to do,
Yeah.
and it takes constant vigilance when you're painting to always make decisions, not just blindly paint what you see.
Well, when that photograph is there, it's real easy to keep defaulting to that photograph
Very
instead
easy.
of making an artistic decision.
Yep, that's exactly right.
In terms of your career, what have you not done that you want to do? Is there a ultimate painting you've wanted to do, or some kind of an event that you...
I'm really looking forward to doing bigger and bigger paintings, and which I have in the last few years been doing that in my studio. I have a nice large place to paint. I'm doing more urban scenes. I think it may have been a workshop with Kwang Ho where I transitioned from painting things to painting shapes. And so I'm really attracted to interesting shapes now, and it really doesn't matter whether it's an urban scene, a rural landscape, a portrait, a figure, a still life. It has to have interesting shapes. And I'm finding that in urban scenes. Some very uninteresting scenes can make a really interesting painting. Like last year, or actually if you look at the current issue of Fine Art Connoisseur, I have a small image of a painting I did last year called Power Play, and it was a electric plant that I saw from a window of a train as I was traveling south from Richmond to Florida, and it was just a very arresting image to me, and I had a lot of fun dealing with the shapes in that image. So doing more like that. I would like to get back to doing some more figurative work, and I am doing that. The shows that I have will contain some of that. I guess I just want to keep doing what I do, stay as healthy as I can, enjoy life, and just constantly strive to become a better painter.
So if you have any advice to somebody who might be watching this, who is perhaps a beginner or just kind of, getting started as a painter, what advice would that be?
Learn the concepts. Learn all the things you need to know to be able to express yourself, and that is drawing, design, value, color, edges, paint application. Study with somebody who's a good teacher, who can explain those concepts to you in a coherent way. Learn your own personal aesthetic, and this is something I had to do. My skills were pretty good, but I liked hard edge work, and I liked soft edge work, and I liked semi-abstract work, and I liked photorealist work, and I found myself going to all these different types of painting and doing them. I'm not a highly detailed painter. I like action, I like movement, I like color, I like a variety of edges, and so I thought, well, yeah, that's who I am. And so unapologetically, I have gone forward and tried to paint who I am and not who somebody else is. There's nothing wrong with somebody who is highly detailed. That's a wonderful skill to have, and they produce beautiful paintings, but it's not me. I'm more of a big picture person, I think.
You also, it's interesting because just listening to you, you've gone through different phases.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So I think that's something everybody can expect too, is that and as you get more comfortable with concepts and the idea of moving paint around or having this become second nature, once you get that down, then you can kind of go through your path, which is...
Yeah, and it will come naturally. It's like your signature. You can't escape your natural way of signing your name, and your natural way of painting your own personal aesthetic will come out. But you have to do the hard work first. Don't think you're going to start painting masterpieces in a few years. Some people might. There are people that are more I don't know if the word's talented or gifted, or just are able to grasp the skills, just the way their brain works. Maybe their hand-eye coordination might be better than the next person. So for some people, their development will come faster than others. But I truly believe that people can be taught, and they can be taught the skills they need to paint well. The truly greats are people that have kind of transcended that, where the skills become second nature, and what they're trying to say or their own personal way of seeing things starts to come out.
But what do all the truly great artists have in common?
Originality.
True. I think the other thing is that they just paint a lot.
Oh yeah, 10,000 miles of canvas, or 10,000 hours to take a master. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about that. Yeah, totally. Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah, you just have to be, and that's something that I think encouraging artists, because again, my goal is to help people find it and then help them not give up. Because too many people, they get started and they think that, they'll say, it's about talent, And I think that some people do have some natural talent, but most of it is process. And, you know, they don't go to a concert. They don't go and listen to a concert pianist and believe that that person didn't start out playing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Right.
And yet, for some reason, they think when you're an artist, you just have this natural talent. And I'm trying to overcome that perception among people and help them realize, look, just get out there, keep practicing, just get some mileage, and that mileage, of course, once you get mileage, then you have to get instruction from really great people like you, because that will help you take big leaps fast.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think workshops are really, it's good to have a teacher in your own hometown, but for some reason, I don't think people learn as fast with weekly. You know, they will learn, and I have my own students that study with me once a week when I'm at home. But I think when you go to a workshop, you get everything concentrated. You know,
you're away from your environment.
You're away from it, exactly. It's all about art. That's all the workshop's about, and that's what you talk about at dinner, and it's what you think about when you go to bed, and it's interesting, you know. And then you leave the workshop, and a lot of it leaves your head, but some of it will stay. And if just one important concept informs your work going on, you know, after that, you know, the workshop will have been worth it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so I advise people to take as many as their budget can afford, but allow enough painting time between the workshops that they can really paint and explore the new concepts they've learned before going on to somebody else who may have a totally different way of teaching.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Eric. I've enjoyed it.
Well, that was the great Nancy Tankersley, Essential Painting Principles. Wasn't that good? She is awesome. You can learn more about the full video at lilyartvideo.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
Artist, did you know that our minds can play tricks on us, and that our own experiences in life and in art help shape the way we think things should look? Is the sky actually blue? Is that barn really red? Is that tree really that shape? And even more importantly, what should your colors or your shapes be in order to create the illusion of reality in your painting? According to artist Nancy Tankersley, painting isn't about capturing only what you know or just what you see. It's about capturing what you know you should see. The answer lies in painting a still life. And that is exactly what renowned artist Nancy Tankersley will have you doing in the exercises found in this new instructional video. Painting a still life can make you a better painter overall, whether you're a landscape painter, a plein air painter, figure painter, or portrait painter. Sometimes you need to get outside of your normal subject matter to discover the important lessons that will make your painting stronger. Soon, you'll see the light as Nancy Tankersley helps you change the way you see and makes you reconsider the way you think about painting by showing you how to apply her essential painting principles to every painting that you do.
So it's just like we're outside painting on a sunny day, and we have to understand the source of our light and where our shadows are.
You're about to discover how painting still life is the absolute best way to practice for any type of painting subject. Painting a still life requires the same skill set and provides you with extra benefits. You can control the lighting.
Let's pretend that this one light that we have here in the studio is our sun.
The weather conditions, and avoid having to find a model just so you can practice these essentials. Nancy will show you how to think and see outside of the box and stop thinking too literally in your paintings. She demonstrates how to set up your still life scenes in a way that echoes what you see in a landscape or a figure.
Who knows, that could be a low-lying chicken coop or something like that.
This video is the first of its kind, using a still life as a learning tool to master other forms of painting. And Nancy's common sense teaching style and her ability to communicate ideas makes learning a pleasure, fun, and easily understandable. You'll be surprised to discover what you don't yet know and how a few little changes to your painting approach will change everything. As a result, people will respond to your paintings in a whole new way. Essential Painting Principles with Nancy Tankersley. Available on DVD or in digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Order your copy today and transform all your paintings.